Hello everybody and welcome on in. Today I've got a featured build for you guys from Asian Mayhem. If you guys haven't seen this guy play or you haven't heard of him, he is one of the most deadly Nightblades that I have ever fought against on the PCNA server. And today he's going to share with us his Nightblade bomb build. This is a build that can bomb with the bow, it can bomb with the greatsword, and it can gank a super high risk, super high reward damage Nightblade build. If you want to see a written guide to this build, you can find it on my website, KristoferESO.com. There's a link down below to it. And of course, if you want to see some more gameplay outside of what we've shared in this build video here, check out Asian Mayhem's channel. Not only does he have more gameplay of this build, but he's got a ton of gameplay and a ton of different Nightblade builds. And this guy not only makes great builds, but his videos are really entertaining to watch as well. And there's a link down below to his channel if you want to check it out. As always, if you have a build that you want to see featured on the channel, or even a clip that you want to see in the top 5, you can send that to KristoferESO@hotmail.com. And without further ado, let's take a look at that build. Starting off, he is a Khajiit on his Nightblade, and Khajiit just an all-around great race for a gank build. Extra critical damage, and of course the Magicka stamina sustain that it gets. I think Wood Elf is also a great option because it provides the offensive stat that this build needs, and it gives a little bit of additional movement speed, which is important for this build too. Taking a look at the max stats, the one that really stands out here is 21.6k health. Now, this is with the Emperor Alliance bonus, so normally Asian Mayhem plays this build around 19.5k health, which sounds pretty scary, but this is definitely a high damage hit and run build. He's not trying to tank a lot of damage, he's not trying to be a durable build, he's trying to get that vicious one-shot, and investing in health is not going to help you increase your outgoing damage. Taking a look at the sustain side of things, fully buffed, 1600 Magicka recovery, 2100 stamina recovery. Magicka recovery really important for this build as it does use cloak a lot, and the stamina recovery, of course, needed not only for using skills but also sneaking on this build as well. And then for the weapon damage on this build, buffing up with the greatsword bar here, coming in at 5,995, and Asian Mayhem is running the increased weapon spell damage enchant on the greatsword, so that'll bring this build to about 6.4k weapon damage on the greatsword bar, and then around 6k weapon damage or so on the bow bar. And then the weapon critical is coming in at 31.4% on the bow bar. Now this is without the minor prophecy buff that this build does get while in combat, and that'll bring it up to around 38% weapon crit. Switching to the front bar, the weapon crit is actually quite low, sitting at around 17 or 18% with the minor prophecy buff. That being said, in this patch, Nightblade does get the guaranteed crit on surprise attack, which is on the front bar here. And this build's primary gank is coming from the bow bar, going for a snipe into the rest of your combo. So I think that's why he has favored the higher weapon crit on the bow bar. The penetration of this build is not bad at all, sitting at around 5.4k on the bow bar and 6.6k on the greatsword bar. This build has access to major and minor breach. On top of it, it also gets 3,000 additional penetration from being a Nightblade if you hit from the flank or behind. So that puts the build around 19k penetration when you are fully debuffing your opponent. And finally, the Balorg set on top will allow this build to push over 20k penetration, all the way up to 25k penetration or so if you have 500 ultimate when you use your ult. Definitely a very important stat for dealing damage in PvP. And then taking a look at the resists, fully buffed here, it is the bare bones medium armor. Again, Asian Mayhem is playing that high damage hit and run gank build, so 20k physical spell resist is as good as it's gonna get, and then 1320 critical resistance. He is running the Shadow Mundus on this build with a full set of Divine, so that's gonna give 17% additional critical damage and healing. And then of course he is a Vampire Stage 3. This is great for a few reasons. Number one, reducing the cost of sneak and removing that movement speed penalty. Very important for a gank build. Number two, getting that additional weapon and spell damage as you exit out of stealth. And last but not least, Undeath to give a little bit more durability to this build if you take some damage. For the consumables on this build, Asian Mayhem is running the Tri-Restoration Potion, giving all 3 stats back, and of course the major buffs that come with them. And of course, it never hurts, especially as a Nightblade, to have some detect potions on hand for PvP. And then for the food, he is running the Hissimer Fish Eye Rye. This is going to give a huge amount of Magicka and stamina recovery, forgoing health recovery as he is a vampire on this build. And this sustain is very important for keeping yourself stealthed up and able to land those combos on your opponents. Now taking a look at the gear that he's running, the first set here is a 2-piece Balorg monster set. This is going to give quite a bit of weapon damage and penetration when you use your ultimate. Arguably one of the best damage sets in the game, especially for something like AoE bombing. And then moving on to the next set, we've got Plague Breaker. You guys know this set. It is very, very strong. You hit an opponent, it puts the dot on them, the dot will spread, and if it's purged off early or an opponent dies, you get that huge AoE explosion that deals even more damage if multiple opponents are hit by it. The functionality of this set is also great because it allows this build to deliver those bombs with the bow at a distance, which is very strong. And then moving on to the next set, he's got the Ring of the Wild Hunt. Now, he's picked the Ring of the Wild Hunt because mobility is a huge deal in PvP. This is going to be helpful not only while he's in combat, but while he's out of combat and sneaking. This allows the build to move around very quickly in sneak, and that's just going to be great for repositioning yourself and getting yourself into a spot where you can land those really mean combos. And then moving on to the next set, he's got a 2-piece agility here for the maximum stamina, just giving himself a little bit more additional damage. And then for the Greatsword, he's gone with the Master's Perfected Greatsword, giving some penetration, and then, of course, the additional damage to cleave. He is using Carve on this build, and yeah, this is a huge deal for AoE bombing. This is going to give you a really powerful AoE smack that you can deliver over and over, and all it takes is one guy to die, and the Plague Breaker set will explode and do a ton of damage. So really great front bar for those AoE bombs. And then taking a look at the back bar, he's got the Vatron's Perfected Bow. This is the most powerful sniping bow in the game, up to 33% additional damage if your opponent is just 3 meters away from you, and a minimum of 5% additional damage, which is still a fairly sizable damage buff. And for the traits and enchants, he has gone with Sharpened, of course, for that additional penetration that it provides. And then the Oblivion Damage Glyph. This is a really good glyph for dealing damage to tankier and higher health opponents. On the Greatsword, he has Sharpened again, and he's got the weapon and spell damage enchant on the Greatsword here, and this makes a lot of sense because this will buff up the base weapon damage of the build, giving the Greatsword's AoE burst a little bit more damage to every target that it hits. And then the choice of the Greatsword, it might be because Asian Mayhem didn't have the Maul in Perfected, and the Perfected Greatsword is going to be better offensively than a non-perfected Maul. This build already has great penetration, so it's not like the Maul is absolutely needed. Honestly, I think any Perfected 2H would be a good option here. And then moving on to the jewelry, he's gone with full infused and weapon damage. Of course, this is a gank build, so you got to have as much damage as possible. And then on the gear, he has a full set of divines, all with stamina enchants, and this is a full set of 7 pieces of medium. Now, taking a look at his skills, the first one he has is Crushing Weapon. Fantastic not only for the damage that it can apply with your light attack, but giving access to Major Breach for even more damage against tanky opponents. And this skill is just going to combo really well with something like a Snipe into a light attack and then the Crushing Weapon. And Asian Mayhem does mention that Poison Injection and Silver Shards are also options here if you want to use those instead, but he does prefer Crushing Weapon for the Breach. The next skill that he has is Camo Hunter for all of those passives that it gives: Major Savagery, Minor Berserk if you hit an opponent's flank, a little bit of weapon damage just for slotting it, and of course having access to the Stealth Detect that it gives too. Then moving on to the next skill, he's got Lethal Arrow, the primary heavy damage dealing ability of this build. With the Vatron Bow, this can hit very hard, and it will also apply Minor Defile. And of course, the long duration of the lob of Lethal Arrow allows you to chain in the light attack Crushing Weapon very quickly. Moving on to Vigor, this is his primary heal for the build, and it actually grants Minor Resolve now, which is a nice little bonus for it. And then of course, Shadowy Disguise for access to stealth for 3 seconds, guaranteeing the next attack will be a critical strike as well. And then for the ultimate on the bow bar, he's gone with Incapacitating Strike, a fantastic high damage single target ultimate that will stun the opponent if you have 100 or 20 ultimate when you use it. Also giving Reeve for a little bit of sustain on the bow bar, but it's not the most important aspect of this skill. And Asian Mayhem does mention that if you do something like a Snipe into the Incapacitating Strike, it is enough damage to kill most players from full health, so there you go. Moving on to the Greatsword bar, the first ability he has is Surprise Attack. As a powerful single target spammable, access to the Sundered or Minor Breach effect as well, and last but not least, it will set the opponent off balance, giving you a chance to stun them with a partial charged heavy attack. This is also a guaranteed critical strike when you use it, up to once every 4 seconds now, helping make up for the lower crit rate that he has on his Greatsword bar. And then the next skill he has is Executioner. This is, of course, the finishing move to take down those chunky boys with a lot of health and durability. And then finally, he's got Carve, the primary AoE spammable of this build. The Master's Greatsword will increase the damage of Carve by quite a bit if you hit a lot of targets with it, and it applies that bleed, which will increase in duration as you continue to hit them with Carve, and it gives a little bit of a damage shield as well, but primarily this is for those huge AoE smacks that you can get thanks to the Master 2H. And then he's got Rally for a burst heal, access to, of course, Major Brutality and Minor Endurance, important buffs for this build. And the next skill he has is Race Against Time. This is great not only for the expedition and immunity to snares and immobilization that it provides, but it gives that minor force buff, increasing the critical damage of this build even further. And finally, for the ultimate on the front bar, Asian Mayhem has gone with Dawnbreaker of Smiting. This makes a lot of sense for the front bar, being a powerful AoE ultimate that applies a very strong dot, and of course stuns everybody that it hits, synergizing really well with Carve and the Master 2H in general. Alright, so let's take a look at the champion points of this build. Of course, you want to put in all the applicable passives that you can for the CP, and taking a look at the stars that he chose here in the blue tree, Fighting Finesse for that critical damage and critical healing, Biting Aura for 6% additional AoE damage done, 6% additional single target damage with Deadly Aim, and last but not least, 6% additional direct damage for all of your direct damage attacks. So he's focused a lot on just increasing his damage as much as possible when coming out of stealth. And then moving on to the red tree, again, you want to put in all those passives that you can, and the stars that he has chosen is the Boundless Vitality for the additional health, Celerity for that additional movement speed, very important for this build to have a lot of movement speed, and then Bastion. This is an interesting choice, but I understand why he picked it. This isn't to make his Carve damage shield very strong, because it's not a very good damage shield to start with. This is to increase the damage that this build does to a shielded opponent, giving it even more gank potential against something like a Sorcerer with its shields up. And then the last one he has is Bloody Renewal for that 1500 stamina returned if he kills an enemy. And this works really well for this build because if you take the risk and get the bomb, you will get a ton of stamina back, allowing you to continue fighting. And then taking a look at the green tree, normally I wouldn't mention this stuff in here, but he does have a couple things that are important. Of course, you want to have Steed's Blessing for that 20% movement speed while out of combat. Again, this is very important for a gank build because this will apply to your sneak while you're out of combat as well. And the Sustaining Shadows to reduce the cost of sneak even further. And it never hurts to have Breakfall to reduce the falling damage that you take. And there you go, guys. That is the build. Alright guys, let's jump right into that PvP commentary. The first fight that Asian Mayhem has today is doing some ganks at a resource. There you see that basic snipe into the light attack, and he's actually using silver shards instead of the crushing weapon, but he gets a really clean gank on that player on the horse, gets on the resource, and he drops the Dawnbreaker and right away starts feeding these guys the cleave. And he gets great damage into the group, taking a few players down, and he's actually running the morph of Carve that gives him additional damage shield, so it's making him quite durable as he goes for these combos. He gets another Dawnbreaker from generating so much ult off the kills. He drops that right away, and you can see he's being very aggressive with those Carves, and as soon as he takes too much pressure, he quickly peels out, re-stealths, and then looks for another target. There he opens with the snipe, and then switches to the Greatsword, the light attack into the Carve, and the enemy Templar taking quite a lot of damage. Asian, again, finding himself taking a bit of pressure from these guys, gets back into stealth, and he turns around and quickly throws some damage into this guy attempting to get the res. He just manages to sneak away as Asian Mayhem took that stun, but he stays on top of that guy and hits the light attack into the execute to take him down. And it looks like just a couple of red players left. And you guys can see right away, he's put so much damage into this entire group. He caught them with their pants down. And Asian just continues to put pressure on this last guy. And this fight here really just highlights that bomb potential. We saw him jump on a resource full of enemy guards, and he ended up killing the entire red group that was there. Moving on to the next clip here, he's inside a keep, and there you see that snipe combo. He goes for the snipe into the light attack, poison injection this time, and then hits him with the executioner to finish him off. And now Asian is just going to wait for these guys to head towards the door. He gets a really nasty snipe into the light attack poison injection, and right away he hits the next player that's attempting the res with the snipe into the light attack poison injection, and he brings him down very quickly. Asian does mention in his gameplay that prioritizing hitting the targets that are going for the res is definitely a good idea, as they usually are going to have their guard down. And unfortunately, that third player there ended up going for block right away. And here you can see just that experience. Asian Mayhem is very patient when he plays this build. He's not going to rush it if he feels like he's in a bad spot. And you saw that he just kind of retreated a little bit there to get back into sneak. And then he opens with the snipe combo, managing to pick up a huge kill off that Dawnbreaker, and then going for the cleaves. And there's a nasty bomb. 4 players going down on the doorway. And now Asian Mayhem is going to try to put some damage into this other player there. They're throwing a lot of pressure on him, though, but he stays on top of them, continues to feed them the carves, and then he gets back into stealth and goes for the snipe with the bow, and there's the carve to finish him off. Now, he does use the carve as a finisher quite often because it is undodgeable, so if he thinks his opponent is going to roll, that is definitely the better option versus going for Executioner, and there's a beautiful snipe combo on that player up top. Again, Asian Mayhem just being patient, picking his targets properly, and he saw that player all off on his own, managed to get a huge combo on him. Now he starts putting damage into this enemy Nightblade, it looks like there, but he ends up responding well with rolls and is waiting for the incoming gank, and Asian Mayhem is just going to be patient. He ends up going back inside just to re-stealth up, and then comes out the other side of the doorway, opens with a bit of damage on that player, but he sees a lot of the blue players that he has killed have now respawned, so he repositions himself on the other side of the fight and lands a nasty snipe to finish that guy off. And there you go, guys. One last clip from a previous top 5 as we say goodbye, but the clips were very fast because this is a very high damage gank build. So again, I want to say a massive thank you to Asian Mayhem for sending in this build. If you want to see some more gameplay from him and a huge variety of different Nightblade gank specs, check out this man's channel. I've got a link to it down in the description below for you. And of course, if you have a build that you want to see featured on the channel, or a clip that you want to see in an ESO top 5, you can send that to kristofereso@hotmail.com. You can check out my Twitter to keep up to date with me, check out my Twitch to catch that live gameplay, and there is a written guide of this build and so many more builds on my website, kristofereso.com. This show is sponsored by What the Fast. It's a VPN for gamers that can give you better ping to your favorite games. Free to try for the first month, there's a link down below. And last but not least, a massive thank you to all of my patrons on Patreon for supporting the show. Thank you guys so much for being a part of this. Thank you everybody just for tuning in and watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this mean Nightblade build. Thank you again to Asian Mayhem for sending it in. And have a great night, everybody. I'll see you next time.